Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm very happy to be here today. Been a bit rushed this morning. So at any rate, we've got David Sereda here, and very glad to see you, David, and fascinated. I mean, we're going to have a fascinating discussion, and so let's just kind of launch into that. So it's all about the staff, what I also consider to be a wand. You're talking about an antenna and all the different designations throughout history, etc. So take it away and introduce yourself briefly in the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is David Sereda. Thank you, Carrie, for having me here today. And I've been working on myself, practicing meditation techniques with most of the well-known gurus from the Far East and Tibet for 45 years. So my interest in personal consciousness is actually paramount. It's everything, to me. And I've had incredible visions, visitations, and gone into incredible altered states of consciousness on a daily basis at this point. But what I found and what really interested in me was when you look at these ancient pictograms in Egypt and these huge reliefs on the walls of like the goddess Hathor, Horus, that they're all holding this staff, right? And when you come to the books of Moses and you see, this is really interesting and how it relates to Tesla and Tesla's first discovery of radio is the way it translates is God, the God of Moses tells Moses to put a fiery, which means radiant, serpent made of copper and tin, which is brass, on a pole. And of course, when Tesla demonstrated radio at the Chicago World's Fair, the first radio was so simple. I remember as a kid growing up in Berkeley, California, where you literally did the same thing. You took copper wire, wrapped it on a toilet paper roll, connected a crystal diode and earbud headphones and a little tuning rod, and I was listening to radio stations on my first homemade handmade radio, and I was 7 years old, and that really interested me how similar it was. And I thought, okay, in the language of symbols, where people get mistaken is they think there's this scene where Aaron, the prophet Aaron, is battling with the Pharaoh, and his staff turns into a snake and then back into a staff. But that's just the language of symbols showing you that it's a coiled staff. So these staffs, which we make, they're all made in Sedona. This has a pure silver coil, and the height of a staff, or for example here, a scepter, these are really beautiful pieces. The height, this particular height is 1 cubit. And it's to find the understanding that a staff is a bioantenna, meaning when you connect with it, it's assisting you in your consciousness. And before I go into the mechanics of it, you go to Mark 6:1-8 in the Christian Bible, and you'll see before Jesus disperses the apostles, and Mark 6:1-8, by the way, is the golden ratio, right? And Jesus is basically telling the apostles that when I disperse you, you can have no money, no bread, nothing but your staff. And there's a really good reason for that, and that's to keep the apostle tuned to the frequency that this antenna represents. And according to the Bible, the staff of Aaron lay in the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant is 2.5 cubits. And guess why it has to be 2.5 cubits? You're not going to believe this, because the wavelength coming off of the staff is 4 times its height as a monopole antenna. This gets really amazing. I mean, I was always fascinated by this as a kid. I mean, I grew up in the 60s when we had real antennas on our TVs and our radios. And when when you couldn't get good TV reception. If somebody stood by the TV and put their hand on the antenna, you could watch the program better. And if they let go of the antenna, you couldn't see the TV was all snowy and staticky. And it was the same with the radio. In fact, if your hand just gets near a radio antenna on the AM dial when it's really staticky, you're improving that reception. This was actually in my film Quantum Communication. By the way, there's a whole scene where I demonstrate this. So the reason Jesus wants the apostles to carry their staff and no money in their purse is if they're all tuned to the same frequency. Think of this as an instrument. Think of it as a guitar, actually, sitar, right? Because sitar, guitar, and kithar, which became kithara, is actually in Greek gematria, its numerical value is 5-1, which is Great Pyramid Angle, 51 degrees, 51 minutes. Now, the wavelength coming off a 2.5 cubit staff is 4 times its height, which happens to be the exact number of cubits, because 2.5 times 4 is 10 cubits of the Queen's chamber in the Great Pyramid. Now, guess what else is 10 cubits? The Holy of Holies at the time of Moses, when the Ark of the Covenant and the staffs were held inside of the Holy of Holies as a tent. And extending beyond the Holy of Holies tent was what's called the Holy Place, 10 by 20 cubits as a tent. That's the King's chamber. It's exactly the same. In fact, I went on a massive hunt to find the most perfect royal cubit in the ancient knowledge of the Bible compared to the Egyptians, and they're exactly the same. That they don't have a different cubit. When there was a research crew that found the remains of Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat by his name was, I think, James Wyatt, and or Wyatt is his last name. And when it came to 515 feet, I said that's the same cubit, because the ark is 300 cubits. It resolves perfectly, I mean perfectly, at 20.601 inches per cubit. Now here's what you do. You take the speed of light in cubits, and I'm not going to show all these numbers on the screen today, but when you take, this is how you calculate electromagnetic frequencies. You take the speed of light in cubits divided by your wavelength in cubits. And then you get the frequency of a 2.5 cubit staff. And you'll see this, it's mind-blowing. But once you understand, like, the height of the goddess Isis and Hathor, the height of these women were around 5 feet 1, possibly 5'2". And you see where the staff comes on their body at 2.5 cubits, right? So I'll stand up. The problem is I'm 6 feet, right? So for me, it's going to come under my armpit here, right? But for example, you can even see this, because Paramahansa Yogananda has his staff very much like the Shankacharya of India, and they're very, very short men, right? I've been to India and I've studied with a lot of master teachers there. And you wonder, is its purpose symbolic, or does it have a real function? And I started having the designs and made my first staff myself, and then got my jewelers in Sedona to make super fantastic ones. And I've been working with these things for over 3 years daily. And the experiences are so mind-blowing that it's hard to communicate it to people, to understand that the best way to help you understand this is to say what Pythagoras called the human body is a musical instrument. He called it the musica humana. And like any instrument, they all go out of tune, right? So you can't just keep playing your guitar or your sitar, because it's going to go out of tune. Because once you vibrate the strings enough, they go out of tune. We're the same way. So the purpose of this is and the purpose of a scepter. See, a scepter is a shorter antenna, so therefore its wavelength is shorter, which means its frequency is higher. So the shorter the wavelength, the higher the frequency. So a wand scepter is a higher dimensional tuning instrument than a longer staff. But when you look at the pictograms of Horus and you look at the pictograms of Isis and Hathor, you're going to see the height of this staff. They're all 2.5 cubits. And I've done the math on this. I've done ratio mathematics on the huge reliefs of Hathor in Egypt. And I can see I'm looking at a 2.5 cubit staff. And a royal cubit in Egypt is the same as the actual biblical cubit. This is confirmed in the book of Ezekiel, where the prophet Ezekiel comes down actually holding a 6-cubit staff. This angel comes down holding a 6-cubit staff, which is 10.3 feet. It's an enormous being, a very, very tall being comes down and shows the prophet that a cubit is a cubit plus a hand, meaning the royal cubit. But in the Bible, they don't call it royal, they just call it cubit. But it means a cubit plus a hand means the long cubit. So therefore, the function of this becomes mysterious until you start working with them. And when you start working with them, I mean, I've had so many manifest physical things happen where, I'll give you an example, and you got to understand, Moses, when he got his staff, the legend of the staff goes all the way back through every biblical prophet, from right down to the forgotten books of Eden. It goes right back to the Garden of Eden incident, which is a very mysterious mythology. But it also goes into the foundations in the beginning of the Egyptian empire, as it forms around this pyramid that probably survived the last ice age, in my opinion. That this thing wasn't theirs. They didn't build this. It's not a Egyptian monument. Now, when you understand the finished height of the Great Pyramid to perfection, according to Peter Lemaitre, is 480.69 feet. You get exactly 112 staff lengths fit into that. And the more you start to understand frequency, wavelength, antenna, you start to understand that Moses's staff was perfectly tuned in proper ratio to the pyramid itself. And if the pyramid was functioning, which it was at the time of Moses, in fact, at the time of Jesus, it still had all of its white limestone casings. It was functioning perfectly and transmitting as a crystal oscillator to all of the, as a mass. Imagine the pyramid, just try and see this as an abstract. It is a power plant, but not for the purpose of generating power to run water pumps, although water may have inversely contributed to how it produced power, but the power is to use it as a giant crystal oscillator tuner. And the way an antenna works is if this height is perfectly proportional to the master transmitter, whoever touches it is going to receive electricity wirelessly as power into the nervous system of that person. And as you hold that and work with it, you start to become powerful. And this actually happened to me in year 2 of working with my staff. These actually plug in at the bottom right here. There's a pin, and there's beautiful gems, and that's the beginning of this coil. And it was transmitting. There's a whole series of pyramid frequencies that people work with these. And I was at the 8th level of the frequency, and it was the middle of the winter, and it was Christmas, and I ran out of firewood. And I held my staff, and I said, I need firewood. And I live on 2 acres, and above me is a whole mountain. Next morning, I heard a huge crash in the forest in the middle of the night. I went up there with my chainsaws, and a tree I have video of this on YouTube. Fell right towards my staff, huge freaking tree, right above the hill above the house. And I went up there with my saw, and I had enough wood to get through 2 months. Now, the same thing happened at Easter. I ran out of wood. I did the same thing, and the tree falls right towards the staff. So you think of all the angles like chopsticks that a tree can fall, right? Because trees do fall. They do. You could call it coincidence, but then I could say, well, why did it fall towards the staff? And I actually got a little bit scared. But on a more beautiful note, when I work with my staff, I'll wake up in the middle of the night when my kids are asleep, and I'll meditate for a whole hour, and I'll work with my staff, and I literally will have full blown psychedelic visions in my third eye with spectacular lights, beautiful colors and geometries. And then when I don't work with my staff, that won't happen. Yes, I'll go into a very high state of consciousness, but not that will happen. And literally also, Carrie, since my wife died last August 9th.
Oh my God, I didn't hear about that. I'm sorry. I'm so
Oh, I
sorry.
thought you knew.
No, I'm very sorry.
Oh, thank you. And I have heard her voice so many times coming from the staff at the side of the bed. Now, remember, when Tesla made the first radio, the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, it was just a coil on a tube of copper wire, exactly like the instructions that God gave Moses to build the first staff. See, a fiery brass serpent, obviously you can't walk around with a snake on a pole. He's going to bite you. This is the language of symbols. It's a coil, right? It's a coil. So, and the fiery means radiant, which means when Tesla discovered that when you coiled copper wire and you ran electricity through it, the spinning of the field generated radio waves through the incredible resistance and inertia due to that coiling. Therefore, you had the birth of the first radio communications. And then it was Sir Oliver Lodge and Stone, who actually, Lodge was an incredible spiritual mystic. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled June 21st, 1943, that Tesla, Lodge, and Stone were the true fathers of radio, and Marconi was using their patents actually to demonstrate his experiment in broadcasting across the Atlantic. So there you go. You see that when the evidence is that when the human body touches antennas with the old AM radio stations, you're improving the signal. Now, another thing I noticed and this is to me the most profound, because when I started working with the scepter and I made it a perfect cubit, 20.601 inches. These are measured with lasers. You can't do this yourself unless you have laser accuracy. I noticed it, and when I go into deep meditation every day now, my whole being lights up with so much bliss and ecstasy. It's really tremendous light and ecstasy that comes in the crown, infinite consciousness. But when I hold this, it tunes the ecstasy to several octaves higher of ecstasy bliss. It's really incredible. I've done this for over a year now with this particular piece here, and it literally takes the ecstasy to a far higher level, and it doesn't go away. And when I spend a whole hour with it and set it down, I'm blown away. I feel like I'm on the best drug I've ever had in the universe. And for me, that's even more amazing than the tree falling down, right? Because I needed firewood. So again, you got to go back to why is it that when Jesus said in Mark 6:1-8 that the apostles had to have these things? He said, no money, no bread, no food. Why do you have to have this? Why can't you meditate without it? You can, but it makes it so much better. And then you start to wonder why. Okay, this is this is where it gets really amazing, because a radio, radio scientists will say you can't use the human nervous system, which is an electrical system, to receive a radio broadcast. Like, I don't start hearing the news when I pick up an antenna, right? That's obvious. But what we do know is frequency begets consciousness response, right? So if I play the musical note A at 440 or 432 or 444, your nervous system, emotional body will have a response. You can't explain that response to a scientist, right? You can't say that when a guitar or a piano is out of tune, why, when somebody plays something out of tune, it just drives you crazy. You just can't explain that. But when it's in tune, you start to have all these emotions. You start to have all these beautiful feelings. And in fact, if it wasn't for music being in tune, probably most of the emotions and the qualities we feel would be void in our lives. We'd probably be really pretty boring people. We probably wouldn't even know how to dance or do much of anything. So when you get to the order of staff and scepter, you're way higher in frequency than the audible spectrum, but you're beneath so when you go to the sun, so let's just go to the sun, the concept of the sun as raw, or you think of the colors. There's 9 colors that come out of the sun. Okay, so 9 colors that come out of the sun, and 8 octaves of those colors. I've actually mapped these perfectly. When you start at the highest amplitude frequency in the trillion hertz bands of each color, and then you divide them by musical octaves, and you keep coming down all the way to the bottom, there's 432 frequencies. If you come in total from the top of the sun all the way down, there's 432 frequencies of the divided by the 9 colors. And Earth is an octave of green. The 7.83 Tesla Schumann fundamental resonance is green, believe it or not. It's which explains why all the trees and the grass, it's all green, because it's an octave of green. And when you go up, somewhere in the upper middle is where the frequencies of the staff is, because the staff of 2.5 qubits is between 50 and 60 megahertz. I have the exact number, and I work with that exact number. And then you can work with octaves of that number, and you can see which color band coming from the sun that staff is. Now, when I come to the scepter at 1 qubit, this is tuned to 144 megahertz. More precisely, 144.1 megahertz. And I was so astounded when I met this gentleman, this French Canadian gentleman named Jimmy Blanchett. He met me after seeing me on a webinar that had a lot of listeners, and he had been making contact with ETs at 144 megahertz on handheld amateur radio band radios as an amateur radio astronomer, a practitioner himself. And Jimmy had built these super massive antennas that had these crossbars, like all these crossbars going up his antenna, that were one perfect, qubit. And because he was tuning to 144.1 exactly. And the 144 is so sacred. I mean, it starts to get so mind-blowing what Jimmy and I have discovered together, that Jimmy eventually we start to design this transmission. We did this last August 8th on the Lionsgate, where I designed all of these frequencies from the math in the Great Pyramid, and we bounced a signal off the moon and hit the Great Pyramid last August 8th with his super, super massive antenna. And we had a guy in Egypt, a tour guide, with a camera, cell phone camera, videotaping the pyramid. And during the moon bounce that lasted for the space of about a half an hour, and we ran it through an algorithm software that detects tiny changes in energy and light. And you can see this huge turquoise and orange aura coming off of the Great Pyramid. So we knew that we by beaming and hitting the pyramid with frequencies from an antenna somewhere else on the earth, bouncing it into the pyramid, we caused a response on the pyramid. In fact, there was a study done, this study was done several years ago. I actually have pictures of it, where they did, scientists from Russia and Germany and Europe did the same thing at close range, where they hit the Great Pyramid of Egypt with very specific wavelengths, which they determine in the paper. And they happen to be some of the same wavelength frequencies that I use with the staff. And the whole pyramid lights up at the King's Chamber region, and it starts to form the shape of a Maltese cross. And it starts to transform as they step up the frequencies. If I can find this, can I do a screen share? Or? Okay, so this is a copy of the graphic of the energy field coming off the Great Pyramid. So if you look at from left to right in here, we start to see a Maltese cross, and we see the radiations right around where the Queen's Chamber is. We see the most intense energy. And as we come up in frequency from 333 meters in wavelength to 200 meters in wavelength, we start to see the shape of a divine, what I call a divine person. It looks like the shape of a divine human starting to appear, and which is really, really incredible that they would end up using these same frequencies. Here you go. I kind of made a graphic here of what I'm talking about. So when you see 333 M, that's 333 meters, 285 meters. So all you do is you take the speed of light in meters divided by these numbers, and you'll see the frequencies, and you see this beautiful Maltese cross forming at 285 meters. And then at 230 meters, this divine image of a divine resurrected being starts to appear. And I just superimposed the image here at the bottom. So that shows you how sensitive the pyramid is electronically to targeting it. Now, what interested me, the video that we did of, let me see if I can actually show you this video. It's actually on my website. So we just go, hang on a second here, I'll find I can find it in my screen here. Here we go. I actually have this on. Maybe I can show this first. I can show. Let me go back to screen share for a second.
Yeah, I will be editing out the delays, so don't worry about it. As far as
so you can't show those, or?
Yeah, go ahead. So go ahead, take the time you need.
Oh, I see the delays
on Facebook right now. We are live, but later I take the video in and remove any delays or glitches.
Oh, I see the delays. So there's a picture of Yogananda with his staff, and this particular staff has a saffron cloth at the top. But what interests me on a man 5'5", it comes to, I could say, approximately 2.5 cubits. And I found that very, very interesting. And Shankaracharya, had a similar staff. And of course, you see staffs in the Tibetan Buddhist system and the Japanese Buddhist system. And again, most people think, oh, that's just like a walking stick, or it's something symbolic. And it actually isn't. You have to experience meditating and working with these, with given frequencies, and you start to see what happens. There's another amazing study. I mean, I followed the work of Valerie Hunt, Dr. Valerie Hunt. Do you know her? She did.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Valerie was a USC, University of Southern California medical doctor who was actually built probably the best aura cameras in the history of the world. She could see the aura live through these cameras. And she could see when a person was doing toning exercises with their voice, that their aura would get tremendously brighter, right? And I knew Valerie, and we spent hours on, in conversations in my LA days, and she was a frequency master, healer. She was able to heal people with frequencies because she could see with the camera which frequencies were causing the aura to really brighten up and expand. And she found if you could raise the human spine to just below 1 megahertz, you were at the doorway where the spiritual universe really starts to happen. Now, staffs and scepters operate in the megahertz spectrum, but audible toning frequencies are way beneath that. Like, for example, if a person is speaking at 20 hertz, which is really low because that's where we start hearing, the wavelength is equal to the circumference of the planet Mercury. In fact, Mercury's wavelength is 20 hertz at its equator. So, and it's also called the messenger planet, which is interesting because at 20 hertz, you start hearing messages at a very, very low volume, right? A very, very low frequency. So the whole thing is, once you, like, I've literally mapped, taking a mathematical formula, which I don't need to, put on the air today because it's complicated. Every single diameter of every star you can think of in the local region, from Pleiades to Sirius to, Pegasus, I mean, the Polaris system, Vega, I've mapped the frequency. Just like there's a formula to map the Tesla-Schumann frequency of the Earth for almost every star system you can think of. And once you have your master frequency of your planet or your star, you can move up and down your musical octaves. And you can actually, I'm actually looking to see if this 2.5 qubit staff is tuned to a particular star. It may be an octave of a particular star, because it's very mysterious to me. I've been meditating for 45 years with the Dalai Lama in person, with Bhagwan Rajneesh, Swami Shan. I can go on and on about all these teachers. There's something so profound that happens to your consciousness when you work with these. So when you see these Egyptian goddesses and gods holding them, it's not a symbol. It's not this beautiful thing that they're just sitting there and walking around with as some kind of a status symbol. It has nothing to do with that. It's tuning their consciousness. And then eventually you start to become powerful when you start working with these. And you have to be careful, because if you had a really negative thought, and I had this happen where somebody, that I can't name, had one of these, and I was in the middle of one of the worst freaking storms, ripping up my neighborhood in my car after the argument with this person, and I'm like, the timing was impeccable, right? Impeccable. Now that begs me to go back to, this is like the birth of Star Wars to me, because when you go back to these ancient manuscripts called the Forgotten Books of Eden, and the Forgotten Books of Eden, when this infinite supreme I am God is warning the the Adama and the Eve not to take in the knowledge of good and evil, which takes them into duality, which takes them into the illusion of judgment. And they go down, they go from singularity to duality and they go down. They're given a staff. Adam is given a staff. And this was probably, again, after the last ice age. That probably, I don't believe there was one Genesis. I believe there have been several re-Genesis periods, just like, Sitchin's work has documented very well. And the staff is given to Adam to be able to communicate, because he's now got sucked into this forbidden knowledge that causes you to judge good and evil, for which there is really none in the divinity, in the singular field of infinite light. When you go into duality, you go into judging each other and you get into conflict. So what happens is the dark beings, and you can call this being whatever you want, you can call it Satan or whatever, it can be symbolic, was one of the first ones to take in the knowledge of conflict, because good and evil is conflict. It's an illusion, it's a trick. And there's a scene, and this is in the Forgotten Books of Eden, where Adam is confronted by Satan shining with light, and he also has a staff. And God tells Satan, God tells Adam that you have to smite him with your staff. And that's the moment where the staff becomes the sword. It's like it turns into a lightsaber. And there's this scene, there's a battle, and between the forces of darkness and the forces of the light, where they both have staffs, and there's a battle. Now remember, this is literally like the beginning of the birth of taking this as a non-weapon to the human race falling and going from divinity into duality, which is conflict and war and ego, because everybody's ego thinks they know more than the other one, or they're right and the other one's wrong. They get into that conflict, then this turns into a weapon. It turns into a lightsaber and eventually becomes a sword. And I actually was looking for the measurement of Excalibur, Arthur's legendary mythical sword, and Merlin's staff. And it's a very difficult journey to try and find out. Like, imagine a sword this long, and that includes the bottom and the shaft. You would have to be very, very powerful person to wield such a weapon. But that's the beginning of coming into the use of the staff as a divining tool, as a tool to attune the nervous system, so that you not only feel this incredible attunement and perfection of the human nervous system in proportion and radiance and resonance to divine, but also you start to become powerful in your will. So again, when you see these depictions of these gods and goddesses in the ancient world holding these staffs, and even Persian King Darius, you can see there's a coil on his staff. These staffs also are making your mind so attuned that you will receive downloads of actual knowledge on how to build and how to develop a superior technological race. So
okay, now I actually I've heard of this book, the whatever it's called, the Books of Adam and Eve or whatever.
Yeah, the Forgotten Books of Eden. Yeah.
And I haven't read them. So I just want to say, however, that Jesus said, I come not to bring peace, but a sword. And this is about developing discernment. And so I kind of interpret the Adam Eve story differently. I don't see God telling them not to actually partake of good and evil or to understand it, because that's actually the whole purpose of incarnating onto planet Earth.
Mhm.
And this is a system. So they're born into a system of polarities.
Right.
And they themselves are polarity, female, male.
I totally agree with what you're saying. 'Cause
Yeah.
go
So
totally
I just
both.
want to make this distinction because I also think there's a great deal of infiltration by the Anunnaki in these books. Okay. And they are tilting it in a certain direction. Humans were on planet Earth before the Anunnaki. And we were also, in a sense, we were already in the garden before the Anunnaki came. And in a sense, what they did was they shortened our lifespans. They put in a frequency fence, shut off a lot of our DNA, and so on. And then there's some things that they did on the positive, like Enki added his DNA to the women that, he wanted to change the genome, and they did. They changed our genome, and it goes on from there. So, and my book is called Rebel Gene, and what Enki encouraged was the rebellion of the humans, whereas Enlil clamped down on that and basically wanted them to follow orders. So I think it's important, at least from the point of view of a woman and someone who is looking at history with a little bit different picture. It's not to say it's wrong, but you have to encompass this larger understanding of who's writing those words and what is their intention, and also the fact that we went into a paternalistic slant of everything, like, top down religion, you name it, from where the male was taking precedence and so on. So
But you brought up your points are really amazing. And I see you're right. We are polarity matrices. And we were meant to become polarity matrices, but if we can be polarity matrices without and respecting our unique qualities in our polarity matrices, instead of seeking dominion over the other and saying everything has to be one way,
but
right?
the wand and the staff is, I came not to bring peace, but to bring a sword. In other words,
Right.
and this might be a little strange, but peace is not the objective of this sojourn on Earth. It's, people think it is, but it's actually not. So in a sense, peace is the enemy of spiritual development. It's a stage that you go through, but creativity, what we truly are is creators. And that's where the wand comes in, the staff, and everything you're talking about, and why it enhances, because as you develop discernment and become more and more creative, you can change the world, and you can change the world around you, obviously to the positive or the negative. It's your choice. You're going to make that discernment again. So again, it's also awakening us to our own power, that the staff, because it becomes like a reflecting rod, right? Reflecting our energy back to us and then out to the universe, wherever. And
yeah, there's feedback there.
Protects. And also, you said with the trees, that's fascinating, because what you're really doing is you're sending that intention out, and then it depends how you want to interpret it. You could say the trees are listening, right?
Mhm.
So the ones that were ready to fall would fall, and they came towards you because you had put out that intention to the universe, and they received it, right?
And they're like a grounded staff themselves, right? Like,
Right.
but
Exactly.
again, I have video of this on my YouTube channel. I mean, they fell right towards the part of the house
Yeah, it's
where
incredible.
the staff is, right? Like they were bowing towards it in a way, like boom. I mean, the whole earth shook when it hit in the snow. And I went up there and I got my compass, and because it's a little ways above the house. This is possible that this is a coincidence, right? Why didn't it fall the other way? And no, there were no other trees fallen, by the way. There was no storm that night. There was just the one tree, right? So, I mean, I was a tree planter also for 23 years. Like I planted over 1 million trees with my own body, and
Oh, lovely. So you
spent
have
a
a real
lot.
connection also.
Yeah, I had a real connection there. But I think, like, again, Moses worked with his staff for over 30 years before he took it with him everywhere he went. And then he eventually became really, really powerful. And that's part of like what Valerie Hunt is saying in her experiment, where she could see on the Aura camera when if you can raise a person up to around a megahertz, which is really high. So imagine with consciousness that if your body is too low and you want to jump high, it's easier if you raise your body up to here and you're jumping from a higher place to extenuate or extend your consciousness rather than starting from a really low point. So it's not that the 100 mega or the 1 megahertz is a state of consciousness itself. Just like if I'm playing a sitar, right, and I hit a certain note, it does something to you. You can't explain it. You're having an experience because you're playing with a string at a very particular frequency. And the Beatles brought the sitar in their music, and they changed the world. Now, because I have people say to me, "Oh, you don't need a staff. Your spine's a staff." Well, then why did Jesus say that in Mark 6:1-8? And you're right. The point you make about the sword is also that we always destroy that which is old and stagnant. And we want to discriminate to remove the old way to bring in the new. Right. So you can't have stagnant peace. You can't have dead peace, like a dead calm. You can't have everybody lazy and lying on their backs and thinking that's peace. Right. So humanity has to go to a higher level. We're all going to face death. We all have to get higher. Like Jesus said in the Gospel of Philip, if you don't attain the resurrection when you live, when you die, you'll receive nothing. And he said the resurrection was attained in the Holy of Holies. This is in Philip. And in Philip is where Jesus kisses Mary Magdalene on the lips. It's one of the most incredible pieces of early Gnostic Christian literature. And that is where you understand that the Holy of Holies, the original Holy of Holies, its measurement is the wavelength of the staff, because it's 10 cubits by 10 cubits, which is a quarter of that is 2.5, which is the height of the staff. And that's in perfect proportion to the height of the pyramid. So that means, again, going back to this theory that I've had, what if the pyramid was transmitting? See, if I have an antenna in my hand, again, it's the same thing. I'm listening to a radio station. It's all staticky. But if I touch the antenna I've actually done this where my hand is this close to the antenna, all of a sudden I can hear the news broadcast, right? But when you touch it, your nervous system is actually, it's measurable. I've done it with a tri-field meter. You go to radio frequency mode, which is the N. This is the new TF2 from trifield.com. And I run a frequency through my staff and connect my hand here, and my meter's over here. I can read the frequencies coming off my skeleton over here. Why? Because calcium is a metal. Your bones are calcium. That's a metal. They're also collagen and trace minerals, but calcium is a good conductor. So it is electrical. It is kind of like an antenna system. It is. But my meter shows activity in the radio frequency spectrum when I'm holding my staff connected to my power source over here and my hands over here. Now, I did the same thing with the handheld amateur radio broadcasting at 144 megahertz. I can see with a meter, my whole skeleton lights up, which means I'm really on fire, which means light. I'm actually radiating at a higher frequency. So that's why in the old days, when you're driving in your 1950s or 60s Chevy, and you were tuning the AM dial on the radio, that whole car was in an envelope of that frequency, which means the whole family was actually being vibrated at that. It's not just the radio station that you're tuning to. You're actually tuning the whole car to that particular frequency of whatever that radio station was. So imagine you're driving down the highway and you saw this huge radio station tower, right? and used to see them on the landscape. That's the same formula. The height of that antenna is 1/4 of its wavelength, right? And so you take the speed of light divided by the measurement of the wavelength, and you got the frequency. And then you can have multiple octaves of that frequency. So if humans are walking around holding antennas and working with them, and there's a master transmitter on the planet, which might have been not just one pyramid, but a network of pyramids, then you would start to slowly become very powerful. You'd be very magnetic. And that might explain some of these incredible miracles, literally. Like, why did Jesus tell the apostles you had to have your staff? Because they were going to go produce miracles. At that moment, in John 6:1-8, they're going to go out and do greater things than him. That's what he told them. And they did. If you read the Acts of Philip, which is one of the most incredible things I've ever read, these apostles were doing unimaginable things, even greater miracles than Jesus did, which is part of why manuscripts like that survive the historical beatings of the Romans trying to burn every historical record, show us them doing things that were beyond the things demonstrated in the canonized Bible, because they had their staffs, right? So when you're wanting to manifest, what I say is, like, yeah, I needed firewood. Could I have done that without this? I don't know. I've never experienced it in all of my years of meditation, anything like it. And I've had more and more and more and more things like that happen. And I've had things like that happen for people who are using these things. So I don't know where this goes. You know, I'm only 4 years into using mine. Moses was 30 years in, 40 years in. Like, do we become powerful enough to make water and mountains move? I mean, it literally says that in the Gospel of Thomas, that if two become one in a single house and they tell the mountain to move, it will move. I mean, is that a physical thing that can actually happen? I don't know how powerful this gets, you know, until, you know, more time is spent.
Well, there's also, you know, in building the pyramids, regardless of which beings built it, they say that actually, you know, they use the Ankh, so that the Ankh is like a tuning fork in a way.
Sure, and it's smaller, so it would be even higher in frequency as a tuning. But you can't just go to the highest frequency right away, right? So you start with the staff, then you go to the scepter, and then the Ankh would be really high in frequency as a tuning device. You know what's interesting is the speed of sound in the air is like 768 miles an hour approximately, right? But the speed of sound moving through metals is much faster. Like in iron, it's around 1,100 miles an hour. But the fastest metal, the fastest speed of sound through any medium is beryllium, which is in emeralds and aquamarines. It travels at almost, I don't have the number in front of me, it's the fastest speed of sound vibration of anything. So it's not only the electromagnetic signal, because one of the theories is, okay, that when you go back to what was the staff made out of, probably the earliest staff story from some of the ancient Jewish manuscripts shows the staff of Abraham stuck in a stone, and it's just like the myth of Arthur, where the sword was in the stone, but the staff was in the stone, and it was made of sapphire, right? Now, sapphire is an aluminum ozone crystal. There's no quartz in it. So aluminum is the vibration of the speed of sound in aluminum is again, it's around 11 or 12,000 miles an hour. It's incredibly fast, right? So if you could understand those vibrations, so when you tone an aluminum bar, I actually have a huge aluminum toning bar out here, the vibrations are going back and forth at that speed. Whereas when sound vibrations go through air, they're going much slower. And then you have the electromagnetic speed on top of that. So what it was made out of, there's a story called The Legend of the Sapphire Staff. I think it tells you how many sapphires it had in it. And my staffs have sapphires in them. I mean, we have a lot of different gems in the staff, and that's because through the piezoelectric effect, I mean, those are amethyst on this. This is a solid silver head on this piece, right? I mean, these are expensive because they're all handmade. This is all solid, the cube on the bottom. So they're really, each gem is also resonating once they're plugged in and they're working with them.
Well, I just want to say also that the staff is a tool. So what you're really talking about is, as you know, humans using tools. And that's actually one of the dividing lines, if you will, from the animal world. Although, you know, we have seen that, you know, chimpanzees use tools and various other things, you know, when you really study animals, you see, I mean, birds build nests in a sense, they're building, right, with tools, what they find in their environment. So, but still, you know, so the staff is a tool. And that means you want to affect reality. So, you know, from the point of view of a magician, it's a wand. And it's an externalization of what we see in our mind, right? And bringing that into this reality. So it's an extension of us is what it becomes.
Right, it's an extension of our own spine and our own kundalini. I mean, if I hold an aluminum rod in front of me and its length is tuned perfectly, and I vibrate it, and those vibrations are traveling at over 11,000 miles an hour, it will radiate energy into my spine, and it will start to activate the Kundalini awakening process, which is a very long process. And you know, if imagine a person saying, because I've had people say this to me, you know, you don't need anything. Like, I've been doing this my whole life, and I've never seen, there's a huge quantum leap that happens. It's like with the moment the sitar was born, the moment the guitar was born, the moment rock and roll was born, it changed the world. It changed human consciousness. And the moment the antenna was born, just think about it. When Tesla invented the first coiled tuned radio, it changed the whole world. And then the transistor was born, approximately 1947 by John Bardeen, Will Shockley, and Will Bratton, changed the whole world. So does consciousness need something, a tool? Yes, it does. In fact, music is an instrument. It's an extension of consciousness. And in fact, if we never picked up a guitar, or if we left our guitars and our pianos and our instruments out of tune, the whole world would sound like a mess. I think, Carrie, the internet needs to be run on these perfectly tuned harmonic frequency bands. And there are so many of them. Like, I've taken your Fibonacci series, which is a beautiful mathematical series, where you keep going up the chain, starting with 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20. When you keep going, and you come all the way to the radio frequency spectrum, and you come to the billion hertz frequency spectrum where we're running the internet now. What would happen if all the antennas broadcasting the internet were tuned to proper natural harmonic frequencies? Would we all have a shift in consciousness? Would it even affect disease? And disease starts in murky waters, where the water is vibrating in a very uncalibrated energy field. I've literally seen people take my systems, and I mean, I had a guy do this where he took his marijuana plants that he was growing, and he vibrated them with frequencies using my systems, and he got more flowers, more buds, and bigger plants than ever. Why does a plant respond to frequency? right? What, and then why
Well,
does,
I mean, keep in mind that Kundalini, we generate what are called scalar waves, because you're not really talking about the quantum, you're not really talking about scalar, but that's actually what happens. So we send out scalar waves, and this has been proven from our bodies. And some
yeah,
people like to call it chi, right? So we have this, we generate these waves, and we don't even realize we're doing it. A lot of people don't. And so it can be directed. Again, that's where the staff and the wand, when you take that, that's the intention, to direct it. You're directing it outside yourself in a certain angle, whatever it is, or sending it out, around you, and acting on the reality around you. Now, you said something about that's very interesting about the internet. And I was just thinking, because you were thinking, what if you changed the frequencies of the internet? But I think this is what we will do in the future. I believe that we are going to realize all the powers that we have that's natural. And basically, we, through our, scalar energy, it's not like that you have to manually do it to the internet. It will change because we do, because we insist, like we send out that resonance, and then it will begin. Actually, this is going to happen because the internet is taken over by AI anyway. And that AI could actually become under our command. So that might be the challenge of AI in essence, because the AI will be the internet, and the internet will interact with us, and so on and so forth. So it becomes like a pathway, a communication. And communication is always two ways, right? So it's never just one way. And especially if we are involved, because we're like senders, receivers. So in essence, it's perfectly possible that we could change the frequency of the entire internet on planet Earth by intention, and by enough of us realizing our powers and just doing that.
that's a very profound realization right there, because once your spine becomes properly tuned, and actually, I have a whole thing on my website where people come in and they give me their height, and I calculate their height and the frequencies of their spine, I mean, from the top of their skull to the bottom of their feet as an antenna. And I give them all their octaves, and everybody's height is basically tuned to a different set of frequencies. And it's amazing, ultimately, because we had quite a few people do this. You start to see people come in and they're like, oh yeah, I already have somebody that height, and I'm right down to like 1/4 inches on hundreds of people. And you start to see, well, yeah, the shorter people would be tuned to their spines to a slightly higher frequency than the taller people, right? And what does that mean, right? I mean, there is a difference in humans that are shorter versus taller in frequencies, and therefore frequencies carry information. It's called pulse modulation, right? AM radio means amplitude modulation. So you amplitude modulate the music or the news or whatever you're transmitting, and FM is frequency modulation. So the radio wave is a carrier, like a train, right? So it's a train as a frequency. The passengers are all the data and the information. And I often wonder, is it the frequency of the staff based on its height and the coil that is important, or is it the frequency is carrying data into that person, or is it the way, like you said, if you give a person a certain frequency, they'll transmit scalar. But remember, it's called a response. It's a frequency response. Just like if I play certain music, somebody will start wiggling and dancing, or somebody won't, right? Somebody likes that frequency and somebody else doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So,
but I think, let me
yeah.
interject this, because you could maybe tell us about this idea here, which has to do with, because I'm fascinated by the idea that in the past, beings that walk the earth were taller, and we know that. So
Oh, yeah.
we are now shorter, but actually, and so are our plants, by the way. They're, there's all videos made of showing that the trees used to be much bigger, the whole thing. And so what this is about is actually why we fit into the earth at this time, because we're a certain size so our frequency, you know, has to vibrate to the level of the earth. But I think that that's like a package deal, right? So even if the Anunnaki come here, it's said, and they're very tall beings, they end up in smaller bodies because they can't operate in this atmosphere and everything if they're too tall, right? They can't stay here if they're too, you know, so they tend to kind of come in and out of dimension when they are here. And there's tons of evidence that they are, obviously, and various other beings as well, but they only manifest for a short period of time, you know, in their tallness. But if you stay here for a long time, you end up getting shorter to fit this. There's some impact. Maybe it's gravity. I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So
Well,
I'm
that's
saying
very
it impacts
interesting
it.
because we know about the giants. We know in the book of Ezekiel, this angelic being is holding a 6-cubit staff. And actually, in what's called the Temple Scroll, which is part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's 3 courtyards that are square courtyards, and the innermost for the Holy of Holies is 280 cubit courtyard. This is supposedly the God of Moses in the Temple Scroll giving these dimensions. Well, the Great Pyramid is 280 cubits. So again, why is the God of Moses pointing to a measurement that's the height of the Great Pyramid, right? So, and again, the giants, and this angelic being appears in Temple Scroll holding I think it's a 7-cubit staff, right? So if you see where I stand at a 2.5-cubit staff, that's my little daughter's story in the background, and you see where it comes to me, a 10 foot, a 6-cubit staff is 10.3 feet approximately, and a 7-cubit staff is even higher than that. It's way up there. So these would have to be very tall beings, and therefore they're vibrating electromagnetically with their spines at a lower frequency. It's a lower frequency, and maybe they can't survive here. I don't know. Maybe that's why.
Actually, maybe they're vibrating at a higher frequency, and that's why you can't see them.
Well, yeah, that's a different thing, though. That's the vibration rate of the atoms. Now, there's a scene in what's called the Apocryphon of John, or the Secret Gospel of John. I love this scene where Jesus is showing John that after the fall, we were thrown not to the lowest region of the universe, like Earth is some garbage planet, but the lowest region of matter itself. This is in the Secret Gospel of John. And that would mean the frequency of matter, of material form, is vibrating at a lower frequency, which is why we probably don't see them. Now, I've seen them with my own eyes. I've seen my children before they were born with my own eyes. Before they were born, fully physically with my eyes open. My daughter Alyra in Sedona and my daughter Astari, and she has seen her own mom with her eyes with a circle of light around her above the bed since she died last August, and conversed with her. And I have the staff, the frequencies running right next to the bed all the time. Now, what I really have had so much contact with my wife since she died, audibly, and the sound is coming from where the staff is. So I think when you talk about invisibility,
It's an antenna, so people that have passed over, they can affect, you know, electromagnetic things. Like my mother passed, she affected the television. She kept turning it on and off. So you can,
right, and incredible things happen.
they spirits always can, you know, will use that, right?
Oh yeah. Well, if it's the right frequency, they can interact with it. Like it's really incredible when you hear it audibly. Like literally, the moment my wife died, in the middle of the night, it was 3 a.m. She called out my name, David, and it sounded like a staticky AM radio. And I got up and I went outside, and she's not home. I don't know where she is, right? I don't know where my wife is. I didn't know she had died, but I heard her audibly,
Oh.
right? And so there, why doesn't that happen to everybody? I know tons of people who have had a deceased person, a person pass in their family, and there is no contact, there's no confirmation. And I really attribute it to the frequency work that I've done. I mean, the frequency work, like in the Gospel of the Egyptians, which is a Christian ancient manuscript, which is really called the Gospel of the Great Invisible Spirit, Jesus is teaching the early Christians this vowel toning practice where you practice toning 7 vowels instead of 5, 22 times each, and 22 divided by 7 is pi, is Egyptian pi, right? So he's speaking in a language of toning, and when you start working with the body doing musical vowel toning on yourself, you start to tune the human instrument, right? And you start to have a higher experience. I think she's getting restless there.
Right. So, okay. So I'm curious, though, if you can talk a little bit about Cygnus. And remember, I wrote to you originally because I don't know if this is true or not, because there seems to be a disagreement among scientists as to whether this is actually happening. So have you heard about this June 1st date, and that Cygnus is supposed to shine brighter than the moon in our sky? I mean, obviously, we're going to see whether that's true or not, but that there was a collision. I'm not sure if I understand this completely, but between 2 neutron stars, and that has somehow is maybe like coming through on a wave, affecting Cygnus, that is then going to get brighter, and then we will see it from Earth. Is that your understanding, or do you see something different, or have you even looked into this?
Well, I've been following all the fast radio bursts from the WOW signal in the 70s, and I've done math on all of them, and they all are falling into this 144 432 harmonic mathematics, and that is way beyond chance. And again, this is tuned to 144 megahertz, and when you understand that the Royal Cubit monopole is tuned to that number, and you see that number in the WOW signal, and you go to your fast radio burst, and you come to these cosmic events, you can find out whether there's something seems to be happening, because we keep getting more and more of them, right? There's actually in the record, and this gets into my work in merging with Jimmy Blanchett. I think that I'd like to do a bunch of math on the question that you're posing on Cygnus, because I do everything mathematically, and then I work with those frequencies, and then when I'm tuned to that frequency, I have an experience. Like, I've had light beams appear above my house after these transmissions that we've done, like full 3 of them in the middle of the night. I see them, like fully see them. It's incredible. So I haven't done enough research on Cygnus and what this prophecy is, but I've heard about it, I've read about it, but I'd like to do a really deep study into the math on that.
Okay, well, just as what we call predictive programming, you know, which is always going on. I don't know if you've seen the Lincoln car commercial, you know, with the big moon shining brighter than it ever has, and it's really close to Earth, and the car is riding down a road. Have you seen that advertisement?
No, I'd like to see.
Because that started to appear a lot. Okay, and that's where I started down questioning what is it they are trying to say, because it didn't seem normal. Like, it seemed like an Illuminati, you know, pre-message kind of thing, predictive programming. And then I found out that there's this event with Cygnus that's supposed to happen on June 1st. And Sean David Morton, you know, he's into the astrology and all of that, numerology. So he's looked looked into this. Now he seems to think there is going to be something happening. What, we don't know exactly, maybe just a brightness of the constellation Cygnus, or one of the planets in Cygnus looking bright as the moon. Maybe that will be some effect we see in our sky. I don't know. Or maybe, as some scientists are saying, it's not at all what's coming or going to be, on June 1st. I don't know. I just know that this has been bandied about. Then the Lincoln car commercial started doing that, right? They started doing that thing. And then you have to say, well, why are they doing that? So maybe there's something to this.
Oh, I want to look into this. Yeah, I don't know. I want to see the Lincoln car commercial. That's incredible.
Okay. So anyway, I did want to make sure to ask you that question.
Well, that's where, see, when
I
Jimmy and
have
I
another
started
one
dating-
for you though.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have another person, Richard Allen Miller, who's just contacted me, and he's going to be on my show. And he's a magician and a physicist, but he's an amazing. He worked in black projects most of his life, in Navy intelligence and all of this. He's a sci-tech expert, so PSI, sci-tech expert, and he used to train Navy SEALs, okay, in sci-tech. So he has a sort of a wide range. And he contacted me to say that he's looking at a certain date around March, end of March and April. And I did a search, and it looks like it might be actually April 8th, 2024. And he believes that there's going to be, because of an astrological configuration and other things that he's been looking at as a physicist, he's saying that it's looking like there's going to be an event right around that date. That date is a solar full moon eclipse, something like that. I don't know, have it in front of me, but
2024.
And it's, so again, the date is, there's also something in the end of March. So he said it's March or April, and it's a Carrington-like event, but it's not going to be what people think. So he said, the Carrington event, you of course know about that.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And there is a solar flare that would be associated, or a trigger, right? But he says it's not going to be an extinction level event, but it is going to trigger the plates, he believes. And I guess he's going to talk to me more about that when he comes to my show. So I just want to throw that out.
Perfectly. So Peter Lemesurier, who wrote The Great Pyramid Decoded, which is sitting over here on my bookshelf, in the 70s, predicted that, he found that the Great Pyramid was a time clock. And if you look at his time clock map, which is all mathematically decoded to absolute precision in the book, 2025 plus or minus 2 or 3 years, there is an extinction level event that he calls the total collapse of the materialist civilization.
Well, maybe that's a good thing.
Exactly. It's all about destroying the old and bringing in the new, right? So we don't know what that means. I mean, are we seeing the total collapse of our civilization now? No, we're seeing a great disruption, but we're not seeing the total collapse. But this is something iconoclastic, because it has a window that fits what the date you just gave in 2024, April.
Yeah, April of 2024. So it could be, he said, March or April. And when I looked up astrological things happening during that time, that window. And what I came across was this solar, it's called something like a full moon solar eclipse. I don't know. It's something that happens very rarely, whatever it is. But that was for April 8th of 2024.
Well, on spaceweather.com months ago, a story was published that scientists saw something is imminent on the sun that would cause an extinction level event. It was huge news, and I can't believe major news stations didn't report what was reported on space weather, but it looks like there's this energy field collapsing event that is they're just saying it could happen anytime. And it has.
Well, Richard Allen Miller says that people don't understand that I don't know how he's gonna explain it, but he believes that what people think of as the Carrington event and what they think is gonna happen with the sun is not exactly what's gonna happen. But,
That's what this report said, the same thing,
okay,
very similar.
all right, well, but he also said, as a result of that, he said the plates are going to kind of like one go under the other. And then he said land masses were going to be rising out of the sea. Certain land masses would rise. And the reason it captured my interest is because I have prophetic dreams that do come true of the future. And so I have had a dream that off the coast of San Francisco, a landmass is going to come up out of the sea. I know it sounds insane, but it's like a mountain, actually, that's going to come up out of the sea. And it's kind of in the vicinity of San Francisco, but you can definitely see it from San Francisco. It's big, kind of thing. Now, this was in a dream. Now, I don't know if that's connected to what he's saying, but it's kind of interesting because obviously it's a dream of the future. And so, and then he said land masses are going to rise. So I don't know, again, what it means for him that he thinks land masses are going to rise. So just throwing that out for you.
I had that same dream years ago, and my wife did too, and I didn't know why I was having the dream so early. But also, the Tonga explosion that happened, the epicenter of the circle falls within a perfect royal cubit south latitude number, perfect. So the royal cubit is the basis of everything in the ancient world. When you understand that even though people disagree on cubits today, the evidence points to one perfect royal cubit of 20.601. So the south latitude of the Tonga explosion was exactly that. And I think that was code. That was the Tonga explosion was an enormous event. And it was,
But
do you remember when it happened?
Triggered on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. But why that number? Why is it? I mean, you're going to see what happens with, I've been getting, what happens, what we do, this is going to get into Jimmy Blanchett's work where I merged with him, last August 8th, because we did this transmission, bounced the signal off the moon, hit the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Paul Hellyer dies that day. My wife dies the next day. Okay, so and then we sent on his radio antenna in northern Arizona a huge signal at 250,000 watts, carrying my wife's musical songs to the sun, to Mercury, and all the 9 planets in the following months. And we started doing these transmissions. It's really wonderful that he did this for me. And I set my children's voices and they're singing Calling All Angels, and we sent it out on literally at 250,000 watts. But the events that are unfolding on the planet are, are we coming to that point? Are we coming to that Peter Lemzure prediction? Actually, Gene Dixon predicted 2025. There's also, I'm looking for the book over here. It's there's another famous prediction about that same window by another psychic that was 2025. And when you see more than multiple people starting to see something happening at the same time window, I find that it's got to be beyond chance, right? It's got to be beyond chance. So you're saying 2024 now, so I need to learn more.
Right. So, well, Richard Allen Miller, I'll send you a link after, if you can't watch the show live, then I'll send you the show so that you can see what he has to say.
Yeah, with her, I can't. She's with me all the time. Astoria, all the time. Yeah. And her big sister is, so, I can't do things.
Sure. But
in perfect timing.
I'll send you the video so you can see what he has to say about
it. Yeah, I really want to. I want to see this, definitely. But the other thing is if you understand frequency and you understand, for example, if the sun was to produce this massive event and we physically raised our frequencies, we wouldn't incinerate. because a high frequency system can't get, it survives a high frequency incoming wave, right? And this was another experience I had. I had this experience, I had two experiences. And when Christ appeared to me in Topanga in these blinding visions that started in 1994, just like over 1,000 suns in brightness, and the ecstasy and the love was unimaginable. I was in an out-of-body state, but these started in 1994. But one time he appeared to me in the flesh, right in front of me, and my nervous system, because of the radiations coming off his body, I started to incinerate. Now remember, he incinerated his image into the Shroud of Turin, physically burned the cloth into his image. And when he appeared to me physically in front of me, it took me years to figure out why I could only look at him for 3 seconds without, I would have literally incinerated, like what you call spontaneous combustion. But had I had a grounding rod, a staff, and I measured this with meters. So if I take my meter in radio mode and I transmit radio waves coming off of an antenna, how do I block it? For example, how do you block the internet? How do you block microwaves, right? If I attach a steel plate, because the outside of this building is all steel, and I electrically ground it, a radio wave won't pass through the wall, right? So if my body is electrically grounded, I won't incinerate in the presence of a high field of radiation. How do I ground my body? With this, going into the earth. With my hands, I can sit in front of a radiant being like that and not incinerate. Now, that would be another reason why Jesus told the apostles, you have to have your staff, because he's going to appear to them in his higher frequency body, and they couldn't bear it. There's no way they could physically bear it. And there's examples of that in the Gnostic literature where he transfigures and shines like the sun, and they say, we can't bear it. We can't bear this. It's too powerful for us to see you like this. But with this, the radiations hit my body and it goes to ground. Right? So if I'm always walking around with this, I can withhold a powerful vision like that more than 3 seconds, whereas without this, I couldn't. Now that means a lot, because it means that if a massive event like this occurs, humans that are properly grounded won't incinerate. And one of the best ways to ground yourself, of course, is to walk barefoot. But the problem with that is you're going to have really dirty feet. And if you're wearing rubber shoes, you're not grounded. You'll incinerate. But if you're barefoot, you're kind of grounded, but you're better grounded if you have a metal rod really connected to the earth. And they said this about the Ark of the Covenant. That's one of the key elements. You can't touch the Ark of the Covenant when it's open unless they had the metal ankle bracelet, which is then connected to the earth ground with a spike. You can't touch the Ark. It'll kill you. Right. And it's the same when you understand how electricity works. If you have one copper coil here transmitting energy, it's called inductance. And I take another copper coil here with no electricity. The one with no electricity with a voltmeter will measure voltage and current. Why? It's not plugged in, because it's receiving passively, right? But if I ground it, then it won't have any charge. So that means you're okay. So again, how do you survive a Carrington type event physically when the energy hits, right? You have to be grounded, is what I'm saying. And that is how we protect ourselves, is through electrical ground. Yeah.
So just for the future, because we've been on a while, maybe you could explain what Jimmy wants to bring to the subject, because I can have you both on in the future, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's so huge. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's It starts with his work before mine, where he's attracting ET signals that appear in numerical values. So this was reported in Collier's Weekly magazine way back in the days of Tesla, that both Tesla and Marconi were noticing these blips coming in on the radio signal receptions that they thought were Morse code, but they realized they weren't Morse code, and they both thought they were extraterrestrial signals. This was in Collier's Weekly. So knowing that, when Jimmy Blanchett found that his radios, when they were tuned to 144.1 megahertz, when he would do these transmissions, they started blipping like all these little numbers dancing, sounds dancing around. I started, and he started translating those blips in on frequency meters, and found they were all very profound numbers. And that there was definitely a reception communication that had all numerical values, and we knew what the numbers meant. So then we started sending out these massive signals, and with the help of other researchers, we started to form a team, and the messages we were getting back were getting more and more and more profound. And eventually, I started to see something so staggering. Think of the Great Pyramid as an electronic all-seeing eye. I started getting actual numbers, because in these little blips that show up on your radios, I put a frequency meter in front of it, and I write down all the numbers, and I take pictures of the numbers. And the numbers were perfect measurements between the Great Pyramid of Egypt and events on Earth. Like imagine that you measure a radius from where the pyramid is, the Great Pyramid of Egypt is, which happens to be at 29.99. It's the speed of light with the decimal moved over in metric, because the speed of light in metric is 299, 792, 458 meters per second. But the Great Pyramid's position, its north latitude, is the same number, but you got to move the decimal over, and then you're at the speed of light. I would see this number coming in on my radio all the time and say, why is this number coming in on my radio? And I go, that's the location of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It's north latitude. But then the pyramid started sending me numbers that were perfect radius to like everything that happened in the Ukraine. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant in kilometers, there's the number on my radio between the Great Pyramid of Egypt, because the north face of the Great Pyramid of Egypt is staring straight into Ukraine. In fact, if you go straight north, you're going to run just right of Kiev, right? I'm Ukrainian in my dad's side of the family, so I know a lot about the history of what happened there in the Holodomor and the Ukrainian Holocaust under Stalin and all those things. So I was very interested. Why is my radio sending me? It sent me the radius between the pyramid and Chernobyl when they invaded Chernobyl, and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I mean, these are exact numbers in the form of kilometers coming in as a frequency on my radio. And I have this frequency. What I do is I hold. Oh, this has no more power in it. It has. You can download this Frequency Meter Pro application. And then as the sound's coming in on my radio, it just shows me what that frequency of that sound is. And I just say that's kilometers, and I measure it from the Great Pyramid, and something just happened there in the battlefield. Something just happened there in the battlefield. And then I measured the Tonga event. I measured all these events, and they're all coming in as exact numbers. But this is accurate to 99.99%. And so they're talking to me. The Great Pyramid is literally itself the all-seeing eye of Horus, right? It's seeing everything that's going on the planet. It's sensing it. And it seems to know it before it happened, because it sent me, I looked through my data, it sent me the Tonga before it happened as a number, before it happened. So then Jimmy went in a different direction, and his direction get so mind-blowing that he can see a perfect to every single sacred site on the planet. In fact, we even did this with Fatima, Portugal, where the miracle of the sun happened. We did it with Rennes-le-Château, and every single place on the planet falls within a perfect harmonic of the 144. There's the story. I want him to present it, you know, and show what he's found. And then the other thing Jimmy did is he started filming with a night vision camera behind his antenna in northern Arizona. And when he transmits these huge signals, like you're talking 250,000 watt signals, these UFOs start to show up at the end of the antenna on camera. And they show up in geometric arrangements. And I said, Jimmy, he sent me this video, and he shows you these UFOs, and they're not just smears. They're structured craft that appear in a nanosecond. The camera captures them in the frames per second, and we map them, and they're perfect golden ratio functions of the way they're appearing in these arrangements. So UFO here, 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 and then he starts mapping all this incredible mathematics and proves that every single sacred site on the planet and all these UFOs are appearing in these numerical value arrangements, and they're communicating a message to humanity, a very clear message to humanity. So yeah, I want,
Okay,
he
so
has a slideshow presentation. You're going to see real images and
all right,
pictures.
but what you say, it's communicating a message to humanity, a very clear one. So what is it, or can you say, or do you know?
Well, the message is so profound. It's showing us what I can see, that the way they function is they're operating in a perfect harmonic of 432 and 144. In fact, that's how their ships operate. For example, on the US Navy data, I can't even believe these guys didn't notice this. This was in the end of a Netflix series where the radar operator on the USS Princeton, Kevin Day, and the pilot David Fravor said on radar, the UFO jumped 60 miles in 1 second. That's 216,000 miles an hour. 60 miles a second is 260. You have to understand that we're beyond Mach everything at that point. But guess what 216 is? It's an octave of 432. Because 216 times 2, which is a musical octave, is 432, right? And 432 is a perfect musical A note. It's a superior musical A note. The whole theory of 432 is where the French used to tune, their orchestras. And the middle A was always 432, and then they changed it to 440 to distort. The Rockefellers changed our music to A440 to detune the human population and get them out of synchronicity with the universe. That these UFOs and these UAPs are jumping through a harmonic. Now, the other data that I got from the Navy pilot testimony, this was from, again, it was presented by Sean Cahill in the series with Lou Elizondo, that they saw on the radar, the UFOs disappeared on radar, and they disappeared in this counterclockwise pattern right over the north end of Guadalupe Island. And guess what the north latitude there is? It's the same as the Great Pyramid. Which is the speed of light in metric, 29.99, 299, 792, 458 with the decimal at 29. So why did the UFOs disappear there, right? And so Jimmy's getting all these numerical messages from the ETs on his radios, showing this whole grid pattern of the entire Earth tuned, that every sacred site, every pyramid, even the location of the miracle of the sun at Fatima, Portugal, and Rennes-le-Château, which is a huge story. The Rennes-le-Château has become a much bigger story because it's proven. This was really interesting because Henry Lincoln, who wrote The Holy Place, is right here. I just finished this. I don't know why, because of course he's the author of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which inspired Dan Brown. I just hear this voice, buy all Henry Lincoln's books and reread them. I buy them on Amazon. He dies 5 days later.
Wow.
And what the number 5 is so huge in here, because 5 is Venus. The pattern between Earth and Venus forms a pentacle every 8 years, the pentagram every 8 years. And Jesus said in the Revelation that he is the bright and morning star, and which is Venus, and that in the book of Isaiah, Lucifer falls from the bright morning star to Earth, which means that Venus is, of course, a station of the gods, and that the dark being is kicked out of there, which means fell from Venus to Earth. So there's this huge discovery that Lincoln makes just before he dies. And this is his last book. And I just hear this voice to buy it. 5 days later, he dies. I mean, it's an enormous discovery. It all ties into the work.
You're saying it has to do with Renly Chateau. I love Renly Chateau. It's awesome.
Well, Renly Chateau is way bigger than you think. When it's only part of a huge matrix. Now, here's another thing, because we're on to the stuff I forgot. Lincoln says the entire secret to Renly Chateau is in this painting by Poussin, which is in the Louvre. Mm-hmm. And guess what I noticed in there? That this is a huge subject. I mean, they're all holding their staffs. And who are they? You got to see this painting in color, because this is Mary Magdalene, and in color she's wearing the blue and the gold ephod, which only the high priest can wear. And the 2 young men who don't have beards yet, who are holding their staffs, are the sons of Jesus. And the older man who's holding his staff, who has a beard, right? Because even young teenage boys don't really have much of a beard yet, right? This is huge. This painting is huge. They all have their staffs, which is perfect, because the only people in the lineage who would have their staffs would be the apostles and the bloodline of Christ, the sons. And that's in here. That's in this painting. This painting is so enormous. The angle of their staffs and their orientation all forms this huge pentagram, and all of the cross-secting lines go through Mary Magdalene's head, like she's the center of a star matrix, which is all the work of Henry Lincoln just before he dies. And that pentagram forms an Earth Venus portal, which is Rennes le Chateau. So when Jimmy Blanchette measured Rennes le Chateau, the distance between Rennes le Chateau and the pyramid, it formed a perfect matrix of 144 to the distance in a perfect ratio. So he shows you this whole grid of the whole planet is now on all these sacred sites, and all these portal locations are all 144, 432 harmonic grids. It's unbelievable how it works. Like, you can't find one of them that's not tuned to the 144. And the question is, why is that? And the 432, because the 144 is the 432, because the 144
But I wonder, because Stonehenge was taken over by the dark side, I wonder if those stones have, falling down and everything, if maybe that one isn't. Did you test that? Or
that's a very interesting thing you're saying, because there's a scene in the infancy Gospels of Jesus that is in the Egyptian Coptic church, where Jesus appears as an infant and all the stones fall over, right? That some of them were probably, portals to not good energy or not good places. But yeah, I really want him to present it, because he's got these beautiful slides. I'm just kind of giving you a glimpse of.
Yeah, wonderful.
But these are signals coming in on actual radios. In this, what's interesting about what happens on these radios, I don't have my radio here in this room. I have it in another building in my workshop on my property. But we can't see when they're chirping in this fashion that both Tesla and Marconi documented that they thought was ET communication. When I put my meter in radio frequency mode, there's no activity, which means the radios are not receiving via the radio spectrum, but they're reacting, which is physically, in the world of physics and radios, impossible to be happening. But they're chirping, and it sounds like Morse code, but it can't be Morse code because it's not Morse code, because we've tested it against Morse code, but there's no radio frequencies detectable. It's something interacting with the radios. And they're sending numbers. They're all just numbers. Every single little beat is a number. It's a frequency. And the number corresponds to all the sacred sites on the planet. In a perfect grid, and they all work within the function of 432. And again, when I saw the radar data that the UFO jumped 60 miles in a second, it's 216,000 miles an hour, which is Mach, oh my God, it's Mach ridiculous, okay? Because they're saying the UAPs are going Mach 5. Come on, that's not Mach 5. We're going Mach 4, 5, and 6 in the X-15 at Edwards Air Force Base in the early days of aviation. The media is covering this thing up like crazy. These things are jumping through harmonics of 432 and 144. Because 144 is 432. It's 1/3 of 432, right? So when you start to see how it all works, they're physically moving their craft through frequencies. And when Jimmy gets real video of these UFOs coming in at the end of the antenna when he's broadcasting, it also reminded me, I told Jimmy this, I said, you know, my first film was Evidence, the Case for NASA UFOs. And I had Dan Aykroyd do the intro on that. And of course, what happened in this famous incident is NASA had this 12-mile long electrodynamic tether, like an antenna, overload with energy. It produced more electricity in this scientific experiment. They thought it broke away from the satellite and the shuttle, and it became ionized with a 1/4 mile wide of gas, like a neon tube, and it floated away from the shuttle. And when Claude Nicollier, the camera operator operating this very sophisticated camera that could see very tiny amounts of light in the ultraviolet, infrared, and spectrum, these UFOs start swarming around this long antenna, right? It's floating in space. So they seem to be attracted to it. And I said, it's kind of like what you're doing. You're sending out signals on your antenna in northern Arizona, and we're sending out specific numbers. Like, we're not just sending out anything. We're sending out harmonics of 144, 432. And they just show up. And they're real structured craft that you should see the pictures he's going to show you. They're not smudge marks. They're not like a fly going by in the middle of the night. And they're in perfect, you know, organized patterns in the sky. And they happen like that. They pop in and out just like that. Now remember, if a UFO on radar jumps 60 miles in a second, you can't see that. It's happening like that, right? Your eyes can't see that. But their radar is fast enough to see it, because radar travels at the speed of light. 216,000 miles an hour, are you kidding me? You can't, a bullet is going 700 miles an hour out of a gun. You can't see that. I mean, you can't, fighter jets are peaking at 2,500 miles an hour. I mean,
well, so when he got the UFOs on this kind of thing, did you try, or did he try, or did both of you try to communicate with them?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, we also the number. I've got like so many numbers in my head. See, to communicate this stuff, it's all numbers. And when you see these numbers coming in, you start to see the pattern, and you start to see what the message is. That the way these UFOs, UAPs are functioning is not through, you know, jet propulsion, airspace movement, because when a jet moves through air, it encounters drag, which is resistance. And if you go too fast, the drag resistance will burn up the wings and will incinerate the metals that the ship is made out of. They're functioning through a whole grid. This grid system that Jimmy has decoded, and that's how they're doing it. They're moving through these perfectly timed harmonic beats, physically moving like that. And that's what they're physically demonstrating, because these photographs show physically structured craft in these perfect harmonic ratio geometric arrangement patterns, just like a constellation, right, is an arrangement of points of light as stars in its position between Earth and that constellation, for example. So the messages are numerical, and they gave us all the mathematical functions, from the speed of light to Euler's constant to, oh my God, pi to Planck's constant. I mean, everything he proves is all a function of the 144 432. And that means we now can understand how they're functioning. We got to get way beyond this idea of propulsion, that they're forcing their way through the fabric of space. That's why we don't see UFOs traveling at great distances like rockets, and they're moving their way. Like the UFO I saw in Berkeley in 1968, it was there. It was above the campus. I was a little kid coming home from school that day in 1967, and the crowds of people on the street. The craft was down low, and it just pops out. It doesn't take off. It's just gone, right? And that's what the radar data kind of sees as well. Like, it's here and then it's over here. Do they have a linear track of its movement? No, it's just here and then it's here. But why 16 miles a second, which is 216,000 miles an hour, times 2, which is a musical octave, is 432,000 miles an hour, and 432 is is the harmonic of probably the universe.
Okay, well, that's absolutely fascinating, and we definitely want to have you back and bring Jimmy with you if he's willing, and let's dig into this more. So we'll just consider this part 1, and then you'll come and it'll be part 2. Okay.
Sounds good, Carrie. Thank you.
Okay, great. And it's you have a lovely little daughter over there, and so and I know she's been on the camera, so it's lovely. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, and I know the audience has really enjoyed it, so it's been great. And we need to close this down now, because we've been going over the time kind of span when people have even an attention span. So yeah, let's just do this again soon. Okay.
Let's do it soon. I'll talk to Jimmy this week.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll be in touch, Carrie. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.